Hello and welcome to another House of Wisdom knife review video. Today we're going to be looking at a Spyderco knife. In the history of Spyderco, it's honored two knife models in unprecedented fashions. First, it's honored the Para 3. In less than 2 years it's been out, Spyderco has made sprint runs with no fewer than 13 different blade speed steels, not to mention the different handle types and the different blade types, a smooth blade versus a combo blade. It's done this with no other knife in its armamentarium in such a short period of time. That's the Para 3. I'll show you an example of some of the Para 3s that I have in my collection. The other knife that it's honored is the Sage knife. Spyderco is looking for the perfect knife to design to display different types of locking mechanisms. The Sage was chosen to be that platform. The Sage 1 has a Michael Walker liner lock. The Sage 2 has a Chris Reeve integral lock. Here's an example of an integral or integral lock, depending on if you're a tomato type person. But the lock comes up, which is the side of the knife, and interfaces with the blade tang. The Sage 3 employed a bolt action lock that was made and designed by Blackie Collins, who's no longer with us. And then the Sage 4 had a front lock. Some people call this a back lock. Here is a native that has a front lock or a back lock. You press in on that and it allows you to close the knife, and then when you open it, it locks like that. And then the Sage 5, which is the topic for tonight, employs the compression lock. And the compression lock is located on the back of the knife, and when you move this over, it takes away its imposition on the blade tang, and the knife flows freely. The Sage 5 is made in Taichung, Taiwan, and a portion of the sale of every Sage series folder is donated to the National Alzheimer's Association of Denver, Colorado. We'll talk about the blade specifications now. The blade length is 3.03 inches. The handle length is 4.17 inches, giving a total knife length of 7.2 inches. The weight of the knife is 3.2 ounces. On my scale, it weighs 3.1 ounces. And we have some other knives for comparison. You've already seen the Spyderco Para 3, which has a little smaller blade. This is a 3-inch blade as opposed to a 3.03-inch blade. The handle on the Para 3 is a little longer. And then the Hinder XM18 3-inch blade, which also has a 3-inch blade, which is very similar in size to the Sage 5 also. The blade on the Sage 5 is a full flat ground blade in a leaf shape, and it has an S30V blade. There is, like most Spydercos, no sharpening ricasso. The blade comes right up to where it stops here at the forward finger choil. The method of deployment on this knife is twofold. One is the spider hole, which you just flick out like that, and the other is just the compression lock. You can just compress the compression lock and flip it out, and you can deploy it that way. The fun thing about the compression lock is that it keeps your fingers out of the blade path. Whenever you're closing it, we'll open it here. You just press in the compression lock, give it a little flip, and then that closes it. In comparison with a frame lock or a liner lock, which is a two-step process. The first process is you have to move it over with your finger, and then you have to break the detent. And once you've gotten past the detent angle, then you can shake it shut. So it's a two-step process. Notably, your finger is in the blade path, and so you can cut your finger. The advantage to the compression lock is that whenever you open it and close it, your finger is not in the blade path, so it's a one-step process. The handle on the Sage 5 is twill-woven carbon fiber G10 laminates. So there's a carbon fiber that has a nice texture that's placed over a G10. The back spacer has two standoffs and then a lanyard tube. The pivot runs on washers and uses a Torx T10 bit to disengage it. The lock on the knife is a compression lock, which I've mentioned, which the beauty of it is that it keeps your fingers out of the blade path. The ergonomics on the knife are great. It has the 50-50 forward finger choil that you can put your forefinger on, and it has jimping there for texture, and there's jimping also on the back ramp. So you can get this pincher feel on the knife if you're wanting to do fine work with the tip of the knife, which comes to a fine tip. You can get it great. And then there's a place for your fingers too. Note that if you use the finger choil, there's a lot of room left over there. And then you can use it in a normal position also. The ergonomics on the knife are great. And the value of the knife also is great. As of the making of this video in 2019, the knife sells for $152. I would like to compare the two highly honored knives, the Para 3 and the Sage 5, and I've selected 12 different criteria to compare and contrast them. The first I'll start with is the pocket clip. On the Sage 5, we have a wire loop over pocket clip. It functions very nicely. And then on the Para 3, we have a surface mounted regular pocket clip. Note that the Sage 5's pocket clip is an embedded pocket clip, therefore it can be held securely with only one screw because the knife handle is holding it, whereas the surface-mounted pocket clip of the Spyderco is held by 3 small screws. That's a really small Torx pick that takes that loose. So the other thing I want to note is that the pocket clip placement, because of the lanyard tube, if you carry it tip up, which most of us do, is placed in such a way so that a lot of this knife sticks out, like right there and above. And with the loop over wire clip, it comes almost to the edge of the knife. The lanyard tube, which is a smaller lanyard tube, is placed to the side. So in comparing the functionality of the two pocket clips, I would say the Sage 5 pocket clip is superior. These are, however, just my opinion, so take it for what it is. Let's talk about clip position. The Spyderco Para 3 has a foreclip. You can carry it tip down, tip up, right hand or left hand. The Sage only has tip up, but you can carry it right-handed or left-handed. So on clip position, I would give the win to the Para 3. The lanyard tube is also different. The Spyderco has a large, generous lanyard tube. It's mounted at the end of the knife. The Sage has a smaller lanyard tube. It's placed at the side so that it doesn't impede the clip placement. On the lanyard tube, because I'm not a lanyard guy, again, this is just one man's personal opinion, I would vote for the Sage 5 as having the superior lanyard tube, both placement and size. On the blade to handle ratio, we will talk about that. The Para 2, because of the lanyard tube, you can tell that the blade is a long way from the end of the knife because it doesn't want to hit the lanyard tube. The blade to handle ratio is not good, as the blade to handle ratio of the Sage 5, the tip all comes a lot closer to the end of the knife there. You still can't get your finger in to cut yourself, but the blade on the Sage 5 is actually measured at 3.03 inches, and the blade on the Para 3 is a 3-inch blade. I don't know if you can tell that the Sage 5 is a little longer. However, the Sage 5 is a shorter knife, getting the Sage as having the superior blade to handle ratio. It's a win for the Sage. So we'll talk about the handle. The handles are very similar. They both have the 50-50 choil and then a place to put your hand. The same thing with the Sage. It has the 50-50 choil and then a place to put your hand. The handle's a little smaller on the Sage, but they're both adequate. I would call this a tie because if you feel them, they feel pretty much the same. Next, we'll go to the hardware. On the Sage, you have a rounded screw for the pivot and the rest of the hardware too. On the Para 3, you have flat screws, and I think the fit and finish on the flat screws is a little superior in my opinion. The hardware win goes to the Para 3. Let's talk about blade function now. Well, the function has to do with the thickness of the blade. The thickness of the Sage 5 is 0.115, 115 thousandths, and the thickness of the Para 3 is 150 thousandths. So the Sage 5 is 24% thinner, and also it has a blade that is 1/16 of an inch longer, so win for the Sage. The blade shape. And this is a matter of personal opinion too, but to me, one of these blades looks like your grandmother's car and one looks like a Ferrari, and I would say that the Para 3 looks more like the Ferrari, and the Sage with its leaf type blade looks a little more traditional. So I would say just for aesthetics, I think I personally like the Para 3 better. Win to the Para 3. The Spidey hole. We'll go ahead and show this. The Spidey hole, I'll try to get them lined up for you. The Spidey hole on the Para 3 is a little larger than the Sage. I don't know if you can appreciate that. And I'm going to call this a tie because with the Sage, I think the Spidey hole is plenty big to get your finger in and flip the knife. And the Para 3, it's also plenty big to get in and flip the knife. I think one of the downsides of having a larger spider hole comes with the next item, which is the width. And I'm going to put these as close as I can here. And you can see because it has the larger hole, even though the knives are lined up here, the width is a little taller on the Para 3. And so this will fit into your pocket, the Sage 5, a little better than the Para 3. So I would say on the width category, it's a win for the Sage 5. Next, we'll talk about the weight. The stated weight of the Sage 5 and all of the websites and on the Spyderco website is 3.2 ounces. On my postal scale, I get 3.1 ounces, and when I measure the Para 3 on my postal scale, I get 3.4 ounces. So the Sage wins with 0.3 ounces lighter. There are reasons for this. The first reason is that it uses a lighter wire clip. The second reason is that there's interior milling. You can see the milled holes there in the liners on the Sage, which the Para 3 really doesn't have. And then it's a thinner blade stock, and the knife is thinner also. The width of the handle on the Sage is 435 thousandths, and the width of the Para 3 is 460 thousandths. So on the weight, we have a win for the Sage 5. Next, we'll talk about sprint runs and variety. I've already showed you the amount of different sprint runs that the Para 3 has. It was the golden child, the chosen one, to be the one that they do a lot of different blade steels on and different handle colors on. There's so many handle colors, it's just like a package of Skittles. And there's really only one way to get a Sage 5 that I've been able to see, and it comes in this G10 with a carbon fiber overlay, which is not a bad handle, but with the Para 3 you have all the colors of a rainbow. So this wins by a mile on this different number of sprint runs. So in summary, in the 12 criteria I've selected, the Sage 5 wins 6 of the criteria. The Para 3 wins 4 of the criteria with 2 ties. So what are my impressions of the Sage 5 Spyderco knife? I really like it. Are there opportunities for improvement? Well, maybe. If I would have my druthers, I'd rather go with the flat screws on the Para 3 rather than the rounded screws. I think the fit and finish is a little better. Of note, in many of the Spyderco knives, just not the Sage 5, there's no sharpening ricasso, and so when you sharpen it, you have to sharpen it right up to the hilt here. And maybe that's not a bad thing because you get maximal use of all the blade. Also, you get maximum use of the blade because of the Spidey hole. If you want to cut something, you can just cut right through it. And I want to point out something. Whenever you use another knife with a thumb stud or a thumb disc, I'm going to use this. This is a Terzola model knife produced by Massdrop. You can see it uses a thumb disc. But if you were to cut something, you would bump into this. The usable part of the knife, you lose a centimeter off of the blade, the usable blade, just because it has a thumb disc here. Whereas on the Sage, you can go all the way to the edge of the blade, and the Spidey hole doesn't interfere with anything, doesn't impede anything. So maybe put a sharpening ricasso, but maybe I'm just full of beans. And then the other thing is they have a cheaper, less expensive carbon fiber peel ply that goes over G10. And so if it were solid carbon fiber, maybe that would be a higher quality. But using this combination allows it to come in at a less expensive price point. And around the $150 price point for a knife of this quality, I think is a good value. What do I like about the knife? I love the clip. I think the Spyderco loop over wire clip may be the best functioning clip in the industry, and it's certainly one of the lightest ones. And it's embedded and held by one screw. I love the simplicity of it. Now, there are prettier clips. I've got clips on knives that are made out of Damascus and expensive materials, but as far as function, I really like the Spyderco loop over wire clip. And I like the idea for the lanyard hole too. They put it off to the side. They didn't make it interfere with the clip, and so it's there for the guys that like lanyards, but for guys like me that don't like lanyards or use lanyards, it's not in the way and it doesn't affect the design of the knife. Also, I like the blade design. The Spidey hole, as I mentioned, allows the cutting edge completely to be utilized. The full flat grind is the best grind I think you can get to make it a great cutter, and then the leaf-shaped blade is also functioning as a cutter very nicely. I like the ergonomics of the handle too. With the 50-50 finger choil, it allows you to get a pinch grip so that if you want to do close work with that fine tip, you can. And the blade just feels comfortable whenever I use it forward. It also is comfortable in the traditional grip also. The compression lock. I like the compression lock. Of all the 5 Sage 5 models, I like the compression lock the best. It keeps your fingers out of the blade path, so there's the safety factor, but also it's just fun to fidget with. And I like the blade to handle ratio on this knife. It's great. And it's light, and you guys know how I like the lightest and best. At a blade for a little over 3 inches to be 3.1 ounces is a very acceptable weight. And it does this because of the light wire clip, the skeletonized liners within, and the thin blade stock that it uses. So in summary, Spyderco selected this model of knife to be the format to display all different kinds of locks. So Spyderco thinks highly of the form and the nature of this model. And of all the Sage 5 or the Sage 1 through 5 knives, the compression lock is my favorite lock, both for finger safety and the fidget factor. The question isn't if this is a great knife, but is it the best knife Spyderco's ever made? Some people would say yes. What do you say? Leave me your comments and opinions in the comments section. I look forward to reading them, and thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next House of Wisdom knife review video.